To measure belt tighten, yeah, we could do it with our fingers, but that's not really a good way to do it. What we use is a belt tension meter. Where in the operation of the meter, we have in the stick here, length off in inches, starts from this O-ring at the tip, and moves its way to 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. Typically we deal more with the 1/16 of an inch markings here on the end. And belt deflection force, in this case in pounds, you can look over on the other side and it's measured in kilograms. We use the English system, so it'll be in pounds. And starting from this O-ring that's down here, goes from 0 through 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 pounds of force. There's literally the force of the spring tension we push down. Now most students guess we push this way. In reality, we actually push on the spring this way, so that this end goes down on the tension, and pushing down on tension, this will spring up, and we'll get a reading of how this O-ring sticks. And we'll go through how to do this shortly. First of all, we have an A36 belt. We look up in the chart in your textbook to see what belt force, deflection force we need, and for an A belt, smallest sheath being 2 inches, oh, this is a 3.6, so it's a little more force allowed, but basically I'm going to go with a 2-inch belt, 2-inch sheath. I always go by the smallest diameter sheath, little less than 1800 RPM. Roughly it's about a new belt is what it looks like, newish, oldish, but probably on the new side. When we look at it up in the chart, the deflection range tells us we should be somewhere around 4.3 to 6.4 pounds of tension. Now that's for deflection, and how we measure deflection is measure the span, that's top of the sheath, where the belt is open, measure that distance in inches, divide by 64 to get in 64th of an inch, and that's how much we're allowed to deflect the belt by to get the force that's allowed. So in this case, I take my handy ruler, measure from this point over to here, and I measure a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 inches. Now you probably will measure 14 inches, which is a little larger. I'm measuring 12 because I'm using a slightly larger sheet and slightly tighter spacing in here. So in 12 inches divided by 64, doing the math in your calculator, you can go ahead and use a calculator, that works out to be 3/8 of an inch. Now in your case, you'll be slightly larger than 3/8 of an inch. You'll be more like 7/16. So on my belt deflection meter, roughly around, I can see 1, half, quarter, 3/8 there. So I move my O-ring to the 3/8 marking. I put this O-ring on top. And then what I'm going to do for my deflection, moving the camera so that you can see the full layout of what I do here, I put a straight edge across the top of my belt. I'm going to push down to where the O-ring just meets the bottom of the straight edge, which is right there. I release. I come back, and I can see right here, I can read this in terms of pounds. I'm at about the 11-pound mark. That's a 5-pound mark there. There's a 10-pound mark. That's 11 pounds. That's a little too tight. So it's a little too tight. What I have to do is take my wrench back to this nut, the top jam nut, and actually back off. Back off means loosen or go counterclockwise a couple of turns. You don't want belts too tight because then they begin to snap in operation. So then I do this again. By resetting this, I move this O-ring back to the 0. That's my pounds. I keep this distance at 3/8 still. Straight edge on the top. Move my force meter down to where the O-ring meets the bottom of the straight edge. Now I look upon this and I'm reading just about 8 pounds, which is about the top end of my allowance. Actually 6.45, so I still need to go a little bit further. And I'm turning, I'm guess, from that point, I would guess, see how much I'll move at least a thumb width. Probably is a good guess. One more time. And this is a lesson right here. Don't be afraid to repeat 3, 4 times if you need to. Key thing at work, get it right. That's more important than everything else. You don't get it right, it's not going to work right, it's going to lead to other problems in the production line. Really can't afford the time to mess around with that. It's far less time to do it 3 or 4 times if you have to than to sit there and rely upon once and done. So I press down, I just make the bottom straight edge, I pull up, and now when I look upon this, I'm right at the 5.5, I'm halfway between 5 and 6, 5.5 pounds, well within a range that's allowed of 4.3 to 6.4 pounds. Just about in the middle, which is just about perfect tensioning for this belt. That's all I have as far as mounting the belt. Next part is that before I had the pruning brake, I would have had that mounted on here. But the pruning brake is what you would use to turn the system on. And turn the system on, we're going to monitor on this. As you turn it on, as I'm going to monitor for 1, this no longer being in alignment with this, but it pulls in because of tension, in which case you have to back off these belts, realign the shaft, realign, tighten it back up, recheck the tension. This is really hard to get unless you really tighten and properly use lock washers to tighten this down. If this isn't properly tightened, it's never going to hold alignment. So to hold alignment, we have to have this shaft pillow blocks really, really tight. Key thing to watch out for. Secondarily, the locks on the pillow blocks bearings need to be tight, or this shaft, when turned on, will start to pull away from the bearings and actually move towards the camera, so to speak. Move out. Something else to watch for is turn on. You notice the instructor will usually leave this on for about 15 seconds, because that time, if this is loose, it's going to start doing a Tennessee walk, so to speak. It's going to just keep walking right on out. Or sometimes I've seen these where they walk in instead, and they'll start banging against the pillow bearings. So there should be space between the sheath and the pillow bearing, and not rub on the bearing. You have to watch out for that as well. Some of the warnings in the system, but other than that, should be a good, successful lap.